Good afternoon, folks. It is January 4th, the beginning of the new year. So we're going to get started on more regular content. And today we're obviously going to talk about the Trump-Raffensperger phone call and do a good amount of essentially like analysis of what's going on there. In addition, tomorrow, somebody's saying, already pointed out what tomorrow's content is going to be. I'm going to do a deep dive on the January 6th count or the January 6th event where we obviously have Congress going to certify the votes or not certify the votes. But that's going to be tomorrow. Today is definitely analyzing the Trump-Raffensperger phone call. But before we get into that, I do have a request that you go to youtube.com/human events and hit subscribe. A lot of you are my Periscope followers or Twitter followers, and Periscope is shutting down in 3 months. So we need to have an alternate, essentially place where people are getting notifications that I'm going live. So if you're watching this on replay, please go straight to youtube.human events and hit subscribe. It's a huge way to support what I'm doing. And if you're watching this live, well, I'll remind you guys at the end, but at some point, please go here and do subscribe to the YouTube channel in case Twitter doesn't do anything. So I do appreciate all of that. Let's get back to the case of questions. So starting out, quote, I just want to find 11,780 votes. In an extraordinary hour-long call, Trump pressures the Georgia Secretary of State to recalculate the vote in his favor. Interesting point. And this is not, this is a lot of different people are actually calling for people to go after Trump for having committed a crime. At Law and Crime, a Georgia election board member demands the Secretary of State investigate Trump for solicitation to commit election fraud. Now, we'll also later on be looking at whether or not Brad Raffensperger committed a crime, because obviously there's this referral for a violation of the Espionage Act. But I'm going to start out with the analysis of how they even think President Trump may have committed a crime. So we have the Fulton County DA saying anybody who commits a felony violation of Georgia law in my jurisdiction will be held accountable. But more importantly, we have the suggestion we get is really from this tweet by Eric Lipton and this email from David Worley, who is the member of the Georgia Election Board. And he says right down here, it's hard to read. See if I can zoom in just a little more. Yeah, here we go. You have 21-2603, OCGA 21-2603 and 604. So those are the statutes that Mr. Worley thinks that President Trump violated. He says, quote, the probable cause may exist to find violations of the Georgia Code. So what are these statutes? So we understand, where is he coming from? Well, they're actually not, they're not really high content free. So one of them, this is statute 21-2603, conspiracy to commit election fraud. And it says, quote, a person commits the offense of conspiracy to commit election fraud when he or she conspires or agrees with another commit a violation of this chapter being the chapter dealing with elections and primaries generally and dealing with all the offenses that happen here. So things like false registration, the willful destruction of materials, voter intimidation, interfering with poll officers, things like that. So it's a broad catch-all conspiracy charge. So, and it's also very similar to the other statute. This is 21-604, criminal solicitation to commit election fraud. And it says, quote, a person commits the offense of criminal solicitation to commit election fraud in the first degree when, with intent that another person engage in conduct constituting a felony, again, under this article, he or she solicits, requests, commands, etc., causes the other person to engage in such conduct. So it's another catch-all statute. So you have a catch-all conspiracy statute and a catch-all solicitation statute. What's the problem? Well, in both cases, you need to identify an underlying crime that has been committed by someone, or an underlying crime that someone is conspiring to commit or has solicited someone else to commit. And in no case has any of the people who are out there saying, oh, this is a slam dunk, he definitely did it, have identified an actual crime that Mr. Trump committed or that Mr. Trump was encouraging Mr. Raffensperger to commit. So, the best I can come up with is sort of the statute that says if you interfere with primaries and elections generally, if you do something where you knowingly deposit fraudulent ballots in the ballot box, maybe the argument is that President Trump was encouraging someone to stuff a ballot box. I don't think that's very persuasive. Or that, some sort of false statement argument The idea that if you allow for any false statement to be made in any document authorized or required to be made with connection to a primary or election. So, there's some possibility that that's what they're saying, but there's nothing specific. And honestly, when you read the transcript, you realize why all these claims are so specious. So here's the transcript, and I've zoomed in on the very part where everybody is laser focused in on what Trump did wrong. He said, here's the famous case. I just want to find 12,000 votes, which is one more than we have because we won the state. So the best, I'm trying to be as charitable as possible here, right? The best version of this argument is that, President Trump committed a crime because he wanted Brad Raffensperger to miraculously find 12,000 ballots that hadn't been found before, kind of like how Lyndon Johnson stole his famous Senate election in 1948, find 12,000 ballots. And then somehow that is a solicitation to stuff a ballot box. But that's not what President Trump is saying. This is a 1 hour long conversation. It's even, I think, right, here in the Washington Post article. President Trump urged fellow Republican Brad Raffensperger to, quote, find enough, end quote, enough votes to overturn his defeat in an extraordinary 1 hour phone call. How are you only quoting a single word when you say it's a 1 hour phone call? Maybe you should probably include the rest of the context of the phone call. And the rest of the context of the phone call is discussing all the different ways in which there were unlawful ballots. People have said, for example, there wasn't even a lawsuit that they were trying to settle. This is Joyce Aline, the sort of, the lawyer, legal analyst, MSNBC. But there is an election contest. Back on December 4th, 2020, President Trump filed an election contest in the state of Georgia. It's got, with President Trump and David Schaefer, who's the head of the Georgia GOP. They filed this back on December 4th, and it still hasn't been heard, right? As Shipwreck Crew wrote at Red State, sorry. A legitimate election dispute remains pending under Georgia law without a hearing date or a judge assigned. And I mean, this is still ongoing. But this lawsuit contains this election contest contains all the information that President Trump is talking about. The Trump campaign alleged, then says they have witness testimony for the idea that there were 2,500 felons who voted, 66,000 underage voters who voted, and goes down a list of all these different types of unlawful votes. That's what President Trump is talking about. So the idea that President Trump is saying when he says, quote unquote, find 11,000 votes, he's not talking about inventing new votes. He's talking about finding unlawful votes. So, just remember, we're right here. This is the part where, they select the quotation. But, here's what he says just earlier in that very passage. In Fulton, where they dump ballots, you will find that you have many that aren't even signed, and you have that many that are forgeries. Okay, you know that. You have no doubt about that. And you will be at 11,779 within minutes because Fulton County is totally corrupt, and so is she totally corrupt. This is the way that President Trump is using this language throughout the transcript, where he's talking about how you are going to find all these unlawful votes. And so when he says, I just want to find 12,000 votes, he's saying, I just want you to acknowledge that at least 12,000 of these votes are unlawfully counted. Now, there's a separate question about whether he's right about that. I'm not going to weigh in the merits of this case, but what I am weighing in on is there's never going to be a crime committed here. Because let's go back again to the statute. You have to solicit a crime, you have to intend that someone commit conduct constituting a felony. It's not a felony to, for a Secretary of State to say these are unlawful ballots, reject them. That's not a felony if they are in fact unlawful. He's not conspiring to commit election fraud. If he's saying, do your job, enforce the law that says all these things are unlawful. You have somebody like Andrew Weissman. Where's his tweet? I have it, don't I? Yes, right. This is the famous Andrew Weissman, who's such an impartial person who vindicates justice so well. Quote, so many parts of the tape evidence Trump's criminal intent, lies and no facts to support demands, seeking to find the precise number of votes to win. This is wrong. Again, there's all the facts are in the complaint, the election contest. Seeking to find the precise number of votes to win. That points throughout that transcript. He's talking about how we won by hundreds of thousands. That he thinks there are hundreds of thousands of illegal votes. I don't think that's necessarily indicative of an intent to cheat. That's indicative of a state of mind that says, at a minimum, you should be finding this many votes unregistered. And quote, reminding the secretary that he's a Republican. How is this relevant? Well, it's an indication of how bizarre it is that a Republican Secretary of State is resisting a member of his own party from Trump's perspective that in refusing to throw out unlawful votes and reminding him of the criminal consequences. This is the really ironic thing. Another part of the Georgia statute is 21.2596, failure of a public or political officer to perform their duty. Quote, any public officer, that includes the Georgia Secretary of State, or any officer of a political party on whom a duty is laid by this chapter, who willfully neglects or refuses to perform his duty shall be guilty of a misdemeanor. So it's the same type of catch-all thing that they're trying to get him on. And what's he talking about? So, he's talking about, where's the list of, here we go, the list of things. So things like refusing to administer oaths, refusing to permit the public inspection of documents. And, just there's all the stuff that deals with not here, but like unlawful, absentee voting by unqualified electors, repeat voting, false information, et cetera. That's what President Trump is saying. Like, it's actually a crime in Georgia for him to fail to enforce the law. So again, not really a basis to say that he's, committing a crime. And that's why, what you're looking at is it's bizarre for people to be immediately saying there's a crime here. And I think it connects back to sort of the broader focus of how in every attack on President Trump we've seen for the past 4 years, there's been this immediate rush to, well, he committed a crime. Like, Trump derangement syndrome is real. It's still affecting people, even though we're, 2 weeks out of a Biden inauguration. So, it's ridiculous. Now, I did promise, obviously, I think there's no way you can actually find a crime here. That's totally just idle talk from MSNBC analysts. But apparently the White House is thinking about referring for an Espionage Act violation. This too, I don't think is going to work. So this is the relevant Espionage Act thing that people are accusing Secretary of State Raffensperger of violating. 18 USC 793, gathering, transmitting, or losing defense information. And it says, whoever lawfully having possession of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, information relating to the national defense, which information the possessor has reason to believe could be used to the injury of the United States or the advantage of any foreign nations, willingly communicates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that information is guilty of a felony. Okay, so here's why this is probably not a winner. The idea that essentially a conversation between the president and the Secretary of State of Georgia is defense information, especially about an election, I think that's stretching it way too far. Also, there's no real privilege that would attach, right? It's one thing if it's an internal White House conversation. This is a conversation between the White House and a different sovereign government, right? States are sovereign. They're subordinate, but still sovereign. So I don't see an espionage charge here. And I don't think that's reasonable. But just getting back to this, that's not really the heart of this. You have a serious people calling for the demand for people investigate Trump for conspiracy to commit election fraud. You're seeing things like #impeach again. And, I think that's just absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, so that's kind of what I got. I'll take a look at comments now. But basically, people who are saying that the president, in fact, committed a violation of Georgia election law, that it's a slam dunk, they're usually doing so without actually identifying a specific provision of election law that was violated. They're also ignoring the context of the call, which indicates that when President Trump is talking about finding votes, he's talking about the Secretary of State finding that votes were unlawful and not counting them, which is part of his job and certainly not election fraud. It's hard, if somebody has the intent to thwart election fraud by enforcing the law, that cannot be intent to commit a felony. And then finally, but by the same token, Raffensperger, while being really obnoxious for publishing this phone call or leaking it to the Washington Post, assuming he did so, is not going to have violated the Espionage Act while many people do this. So that's what I've got. I'll look at some of these comments that I have conveniently. By the way, you should use StreamYard for streaming if you don't already. It's very, very useful. The only crime is Brad not following his own election laws. This is from David Hernandez. There's clearly as I've said before, if you go here, you have this failure of public officer to perform their duty. There's probably more of a colorable argument that Raffensperger did that than anything Trump did. Now, that said, I haven't seen clear evidence that Raffensperger failed to enforce election law. And that's the kind of thing that would be hopefully resolved in this election contest, which hasn't been heard yet. Let's see. What else is there? The Dems are in panic mode. I don't necessarily think they're in panic mode, honestly. MSNBC is just always going to feed its base crazy conspiracy talk about the president. That's literally what it did for 4 years, and it's what it's going to continue to do. So I don't think that's particularly surprising. Do I think it violated the rules of releasing info in the context of a settlement negotiation? I don't think so, because at this point, there's not like, I don't think it is, in fact, like necessarily. I don't know. I doubt it. But I'd have to look into that more. That's not like, it's not clear, was this actually a formal settlement negotiation? Maybe Raffensperger didn't think so. There's a lot. And also I'd have to know what the rules were in Georgia to do that. So what else is there? Somebody says, when did the GOP become the party of victimhood? It's not the party of victimhood. It's the party of like trying to like enforce the law and not get cheated. It's not victimhood to say I don't want to get cheated, regardless of the merits. So who else is there? Interesting. Periscope cuts out constantly. YouTube much better. Well, that's something good to know. If YouTube is actually much better and much more consistent, then that's a really good reason for everybody to go ahead and subscribe at youtube.com/human events. Again, for those of you who are still here, one of the things we're dealing with is Periscope's about to shut down, and it's going to be a lot. If you guys are going to want to get notifications for our live streams, I think it's going to shut down in the end of March, and we're going to want people to be at a different account. So this is if you are a long-term viewer of Will Chamberlain Periscopes and you're someone who supported Human Events, please go to youtube.com/human events and subscribe to the channel. What else is there? Has the election board given the Georgia State Subcommittee the ballots to be examined, audited? I don't know the answer to that question. This one ultimately is just going to be, I'm just answering the question about whether somebody committed a crime with this phone call. Somebody says, Meadows stated at the beginning of the call that this was a confidential settlement call. Should they release it? Well, that's kind of one of those things that lawyers or even non-lawyers try to do. They try and say at the beginning of a call, they say, this is confidential. Or they send you a letter or something and they say, this is a confidential letter. You can't reveal it. It's like, well, that's not actually how it works. That's not when you send a threat or a request to an opposing party in litigation, that's not privileged information. You have privileged information when you're talking to your own client, you're talking to your doctor, you're talking to your psychiatrist, or you're talking about work product that your lawyer or someone else is doing that stays internal. It's not, you don't have privilege in the communications you make with the opposing party. So that's, as my colleague, Still Gray, Ian Chong says, it's not actually enforceable. That's very true. I'll take a few more questions. What's the name of the Periscope? The Periscope is at Will Chamberlain. And if you're on Twitter, you should follow me on Twitter at Will Chamberlain. That's a good way to get access to it. Somebody says, how can we, the people, demand the contest get immediate attention, an assigned date, and a judge? It's not clear that. I don't know how to make that demand, honestly. I think that it's the Georgia judicial system is messed up. There's a rule requiring these election contests to be heard within 20 days. And this one hasn't even been heard. And more to the point, there's a bigger problem with the fact that every other election contest, election litigation has been resolved pretty judiciously against the president. Most of them, as I've talked about before, because they had some obvious procedural issue, like a standing problem or a mootness problem. But this is the one that for a while I've said has been the most viable and legally coherent challenge to the election, right? It's in keeping with Georgia's election statute. It shows the proper plaintiff. There's clearly jurisdiction, et cetera. And so it's very, very concerning that this is the one piece of litigation that Georgia is slow rolling and dragging its feet on. And so it's very, very bizarre. So somebody says YouTube doesn't cut it out at all and Periscope does frequently. Again, another reason for people to start watching this on YouTube. Anyway, so again, I'm going to wrap it up there. Again, if you are new here, subscribe, or like if you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to Human Events at youtube.com/human events. We are, again, Periscope is shutting down at the end of March. And so the following we've built up there is just going to, I assume, just snap and disappear. And we're going to want to be doing these live streams on a different platform unless Twitter magically it gets Twitter Live up to the shape that Periscope, or something else up to the shape that Periscope was. So it is a huge, huge benefit to us if you go ahead and subscribe to us at youtube.com/unevents. Thank you for watching. And tomorrow we will be talking about January 6th and the election certification. Later, folks. Peace.